Hi guys, so today we're going to be talking about the French Revolutions of 1830 and 1848. Vive la France was an expression used in French to show patriotism, translating to Long Live France. This phrase was used throughout many of the earlier French revolutions, specifically during the storming of the Bastille in 1789, a fortress and a political prison. The phrase carried on throughout other revolutions and is still used in France today during many elections and things of that sort. The revolutions of 1830 and 1848 are also referred to as the July and February revolutions. The revolution of 1830 is known as the July Revolution because it was fought during July. No surprise there. And the revolution of 1848 was fought in February, so it's also known as the February Revolution.
The French revolutions of 1830 and 1848 are known as the two later revolutions, considering France had a few prior to those two. These two events impacted not only all of France, but the rest of Europe as well. The July Revolution was caused after Louis XVIII died and his brother Charles X rose to power, and the French Revolution of 1830 was triggered. It was provoked by Paris radicals after Charles X had suspended the Constitution and later issued what are known as his July Ordinances. The Ordinances of July 26, 1830 dissolved the Chamber of Deputies, suspended freedom of the press, modified the electoral laws so that 3/4 of the electorate lost their votes, and called for new elections to the chamber in September of that year. The Revolution of 1830 began with 3 days of fighting from July 27th to July 29th of 1830. On Tuesday, July 27th, fighting erupted in the streets of Paris between armed military officials and angered citizens. By Thursday, July 29th, the rebels gained control and started to work towards forcing Charles X to abdicate the throne. On July 31st, 1830, King Charles left the Château de Saint-Cloud, a palace in France, intending to seek refuge in Versailles. By August 2nd, King Charles X abdicated, bypassing his son, the Dauphin, in favor of his grandson Henry, Duke of Bordeaux, who was not yet 10 years old and could therefore not yet inherit the throne. There was much conflict between King Charles and his son, but after about 20 minutes, the Dauphin countersigned the declaration and renounced his rights to the throne of France. However, Louis Philippe ignored this document and on August 9th had himself proclaimed the King of the French. The upper middle class was now victorious in their decision to name the Duke of Orleans, Louis Philippe, their king.
Moving on to the French Revolution of 1848, citizens of France started having Republican banquets. On February 22nd of 1848, the Republicans wanted to have a dinner to celebrate George Washington's birthday. Because what person better to celebrate at a Republican dinner than George Washington? However, François Guizot, Louis Philippe's prime minister, says no to the dinner, considering it treasonous to France. Following this, pretty much all political gatherings in France had been outlawed, and activists of the largely middle class began holding a series of fundraising banquets known in France as Campagne des Banquets. These banquets were meant to find a way around the government restriction on political meetings. Eventually, all political banquets were banned by the French government and the people revolted. Anger over the outlawing of the political banquets brought crowds of Paris citizens flooding out onto the streets at noon on the 22nd of February, 1848. They directed their anger against the citizen king Louis Philippe and his chief minister for foreign and domestic policy, François Guizot. The crowds marched past Guizot's residence, erected barricades in the streets of Paris, and fighting broke out between the citizens and the Paris Municipal Guards. At 2 p.m. the next day, the 23rd of February, Prime Minister Guizot resigned. Upon hearing the news of Guizot's resignation, a large crowd gathered outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. An officer ordered the crowd not to pass, but people in the front of the crowd were being pushed by the rear. Eventually, in what is widely regarded as an accident, a soldier discharged his musket and the rest of the soldiers then fired into the crowd. 52 people were killed, and Paris was soon a barricaded city. On February 24, 1848, King Louis Philippe abdicated the throne and fled to England in disguise in favor of his 9-year-old grandson Philippe Comte de Paris. On February 26th, the liberal opposition organized the provisional government called the Second Republic. Elections for a Constituent Assembly were scheduled for April 23, 1848. It was to establish a new republican government for France. Two goals of the Second Republic were universal suffrage and unemployment relief. Universal male suffrage was enacted on March 2, 1848, and relief for the unemployed was achieved through the enactment of national workshops. National workshops guaranteed French citizens the right to work. By May of 1848, 100,000 workers had been unemployed. Following these events came the June Days Uprising from June 23 to June 26 of 1848, which was a brief and bloody civil uprising in Paris in the early days of the Second Republic. The new government instituted numerous radical reforms, but the new assembly, composed mainly of moderate and conservative candidates, were determined to cut costs and end risky experiments such as the national workshops provided for the unemployed. Thousands of Paris workers, suddenly cut off from the state payroll, were joined by radical sympathizers and took to the streets in protest. During this June Days Uprising, at least 1,500 rebels were killed, 12,000 were arrested, and many were exiled to Algeria.
The National Constituent Assembly finished the new constitution for France on October 23, 1848. The new constitution contained several provisions dealing with the demands of the working classes, including the phrase, the right to work, and in the eyes of the party of the order, these provisions were now entirely acceptable in the new conservative political environment after the June Days Uprising. After the Constitution was finished, the National Constituent Assembly scheduled a presidential election for December 10, 1848. On December 10th, Louis Napoleon was elected sole leader of France. After being elected, Louis Napoleon re-established universal suffrage and took the title Emperor Napoleon III. He also later dissolved the National Constituent Assembly, which finally ended the French Revolution, and the Second Empire began. And here are our sources.